Hey, what's going on, guys? In this video we're going to create a breathing relaxation web app, just a really simple animation using CSS animations and JavaScript and of course HTML. And I really like this project because it shows you how to use JavaScript along with CSS animations. And this is part of my 20 web projects with vanilla JavaScript course on Udemy, which I'll have a link to in the description with a promo code if you're interested. And I also have the GitHub repo, which has all 20 projects, including this one, if you want to take a look at the code. Also have the background image in here and whatever you need. So we're going to go ahead and create this. So let's jump into VS Code. And what I have here is just an image folder with the background image. And of course, you can use any background image you want. And then I just have my HTML, my CSS, and my script.js file. So we're going to start with the HTML. So we'll create a boilerplate here, and we'll just call this relaxer, and let's put in our style sheet. And then in the body, we'll have an H1 and say relaxer. Now, as far as the elements here that we're going to create with our HTML, I just want to explain what they are. So basically, around this whole thing, we're going to have a container, and then within that, we're going to have a circle class, which represents this solid circle, and behind it will be a gradient circle. So this gives you the effect of this has like a multicolored border, but it's actually just a circle behind it. Using the position property, we're going to position it behind it and give it a gradient color. And then this white circle that spins around it, that'll be the pointer. And we'll use CSS animations to create this effect. And then we just have a simple paragraph that's going to change based on where in the animation it is. All right, so let's go ahead and create the div with the class of circle. So that's going to represent the solid colored circle. We'll have a paragraph. I'll give that an ID of text. We don't have to put anything in it because it'll get inserted dynamically into the DOM through JavaScript. And then we'll have the pointer container. So this is going to wrap around the pointer class, which is going to be that little white circle. And then we want the gradient circle. So that's the circle that's behind it that gives it that border effect. And that's actually it for the HTML. We just need to, oh, actually, I didn't put the container in. I'm sorry. We need to have the container wrap around everything. So this div needs to go down here and wrap around everything. You know what? Let me put on format on save. I don't know why I don't have that enabled. Let's see, format on save. I must have shut that off for some reason. There we go. Now we just need to link in the script. So we'll say script source, and I called it script.js. Now I'm going to take a different approach. In the course, I believe I just went right to the CSS. In this case, I'm going to I want to do the JavaScript first. There's really not that much. There's only maybe 20 lines or so. So I want to bring in a couple things. One is the container, which wraps around everything. So let's say document query selector, and we'll select the class of container. And then we have the text, the paragraph with the ID of text. So we'll say document.querySelector or getElementById, and we'll put an ID of text, or grab the ID of text. Now, as far as the animation time, let me just show you, from when it starts here and it goes all the way around, so a full rotation, I want that to be 7.5 seconds. That seems to be a good number. And then I want to break it up into, the breathe. So from here to here, 3 seconds. The hold will be 1.5 seconds, and then breathe out 3 seconds, which all adds up to 7.5. So let's create a variable here called total time and set this to 7,500, so 7,500 milliseconds. And then let's create the breathe time. Now, instead of hard coding this, I'm going to take the total time and divide that by 5. So that's going to give me 1.5 in this case, and then I'm going to multiply that by 2. And I did this, I don't want to hard code it because just in case we happen to change this number. So that'll be our breathe time, which in our case will be 3 seconds. And then let's get the hold time. So to calculate that, I'm just going to take the total time and divide by 5, and that's going to give me 1.5 or 1,500 milliseconds. All right, now we want a function to constantly run. So we're going to create a function called breathe animation. Okay, so breathe animation, and then we immediately want to set the text because there's nothing in that by default. So let's set that to breathe in because that's the first instruction. And then the container, container. So the way that how this expands and retracts, we'll have a container and it's going to either have a class of grow, which is going to make it expand, or a class of shrink that will make it shrink. And we'll be able to make that happen with CSS animations, but we need to add and remove those classes. So we want to start off with the container having a class name, or actually two classes. One is container, but we also want to have the grow class. Now we need to use the set timeout function here, which what this does, it takes in a function, so we'll use an arrow function, and then as a second parameter it takes in a time to wait until you execute whatever you put in this function. So for instance, if I put 3000, that's 3 seconds or 3000 milliseconds. So it would wait this long until, if I put like a console log or something in here, it'll wait 3 seconds until it runs that. Now we don't want a hard-coded number in here, we want the breathe time in here because we want to wait that amount of time, which in our case is going to be 3 seconds, or it could change based on the total time. Now what I want to happen in here is to change the text. So we'll just say text, inner text. So inner text will just change, the text that's inside that paragraph. We want to change it to hold after this amount of time. Okay. Now inside this set timeout, I'm going to have another set timeout with a function. And in here, as far as the amount of time to wait is going to be the hold time. Okay, so after that hold time, which is going to be that 1.5 seconds, we then want to breathe out. So we'll change the text, inner text, and we'll change that to breathe out. Now at the same time, we want to add the shrink class because that's when we want the circle to start to scale down. So let's take the container and let's add to the class name property, and let's make that container and shrink. And you can use add class, class list dot add class, and remove class if you want, but this is just a simple way of doing it. Okay, so this is our function. Now we want to call this immediately, so I'm going to call breathe animation here, but we also want to run this every 7.5 seconds or whatever we have in this total time variable. So we can do that with set interval. So set interval will take in a function, which in our case is going to be breathe animation, and it'll run it every whatever. In this case it would be every 3 seconds, but we want to put in here the total time. So we want to run it every 7.5 seconds. And that's it. That's our JavaScript. Now if we save this and we take a look at our app, which I'll open with live server, the text should change. So breathe in, hold, breathe out. So breathe in and breathe out will be 3 seconds, hold will be 1.5 seconds. Now obviously that's all that's happening because we don't have the CSS to show the circle and the animations and stuff like that. So that's what we'll work on next. So let's jump into style CSS. I am going to just paste in some of the basic stuff here, like importing our font. I'm using Montserrat, and then our box sizing set to border box. Background I'm setting to the bg.jpg that I have, centering it. I am displaying flex here and changing it to a column instead of a row, and then aligning the body to this, just pushing everything into the center. Now for the container, and I'll just go ahead and save this and we can see what it looks like. So that's what it's going to look like. We have no circle or anything, we just see the text change. So for the container, This wraps around everything, and I'm going to set this to display flex, and I want to align everything. Oops, we want to align items to the center, and we also want to justify content to the center, which will put it in the middle on both the X and Y axis, or the main and the cross axis. And we want to set the let's set the height to 300 pixels and the width to 300 pixels on the container. And I'm going to set the margin to auto to make sure it's in the middle. And we want to position this relative because we want to position the circles absolute within the container. And then as far as the transform goes, we're going to set this to scale and then 1, which is just the default scaling. Because the way that we're going to make this extract or expand and retract is with this scale property, or the transform scale property here. Because remember, we have that show. Actually, if I go back here and I open up my tools, you'll see on the container, see the grow class, now it's shrink. So that's going to continuously change because of our JavaScript. So we're going to take advantage of that and make our circle expand and retract. But first we need to create the circles. So I believe that's all we need for the container. So let's move on to, I'm actually going to do the gradient circle first, because the gradient circle is going to be behind the solid circle. So just to clarify, this right here, it looks like it's like a border, but it's a gradient circle, and then this solid circle is positioned over it. So we're going to do the gradient one first, the one that's behind. So gradient circle, as far as the background, I'm going to use the conic gradient property, which takes in just a bunch of different colors, and you can set the percentage of each color. Okay, so I pasted this in because I don't want to type all this out, but these are the colors and the percentages. Now, if you want this to be a completely different look, different color, you can change these values if you'd like. Now, the height and the width, I'm going to set slightly larger than the other circle, or slightly larger than the container, which is 300 pixels. So I'm going to set this to 320, the height and the width. And I also want to move it up and over to the left, because I want it to be directly behind the other circle. I don't want it to start in the same place. So let's set the top to -10 pixels, and let's set the left to -10 pixels. That will move it up and over. Whoops. All right, and then in addition to this, we need it behind the solid colored circle. So we're going to set the z-index here to -2, which will move it behind it. And then, of course, to make it a circle, because right now, if I save, let's go to our project. So right now, it looks like this. So we need this to be a circle. So we can do that with border radius. So border radius 50%, and that will change it to a circle. Now, we want to position this absolute within the container. So let's set position to absolute. Yeah, and actually I'm just gonna move this right here, right above where we have the top and the left. All right, and then I think we should be all set. So now you can see that it's positioned in the container, absolute. We have the text right in the middle, which is what we want. And now we want the solid color circle in front of it. So let's do that next. So circle. Remember, this is the solid color circle, so I'm going to add a background color, and the color is going to be 010 and then F1C, which is a dark color, and then let's set the height. So remember, the container is 300 pixels, so I'm going to set the height and the width to 100% of that container. And remember, the gradient is 320, so it's going to peek out a little bit, give it that border effect. And then as far as the position, that's also going to be absolute within the container, but we're going to set top 0, left 0. That way it's right in the middle of this one here, which is slightly moved up and over. Okay, and then let's see, as far as the z-index goes, we want this to be in front of the other one, so I'll set it to -1 because the gradient is set to -2. So let's save that and let's take a look. Okay, so it's still a box. We need to add our border radius. I'll just copy that. And now if we take a look, good. So that's exactly what we want. Now as far as the pointer, we need to add that, which is the little white circle that goes around it. And we haven't added the shrink and grow effect either, but I just want to get the pointer in there. So let's do that. So we have a pointer container. So the pointer container, I'm going to set this to position absolute within the container, or the main container I should say. I'm going to place it -40 pixels from the top, because remember we want it to be up above, and then from the left, let's say 140 pixels. We want it to start at the top middle, right? Now the width of the pointer itself will be 20 pixels, and we're going to set the height to 190 pixels. Now this is the container, not the actual pointer itself. And then the animation will just add that after. But if we save this and we take a look, we're not going to see anything because it's just the container. So let's add the actual pointer. So the pointer, I'm going to set a background color of white, and it needs to be a circle. So let's say border radius 50%, and the height of the pointer will be 20 pixels and the width will be 20 pixels. And let's just display this as a block. And if we save that, now we just have this little white circle that's right above the larger circle. So now we need to implement the animations. We have everything styled, but we don't have any animations. So we'll have basically 3 different things here. We want rotate, which is going to have the pointer rotate around everything. We want grow, which is going to make this grow, or extract, whatever you want to call it. And then shrink, which will make it shrink back down on the breathe out. So let's add a rotate animation. We're going to use a CSS keyframe, so at keyframes, and then we can name this. I'm going to call it rotate. This could technically be called whatever you want, and we could put percentages in here if you want something to happen at certain points, certain percentages, or we can just use from and to, which is what I'm going to do here. So we want to start with a certain thing, in this case a rotation position, so we want to use the transform property and then rotate, and we want to start at 0 degrees. Okay, and then for the 2, we want to put in transform, and for rotate, we want it to go full circle, so this is going to be 360, so 360 degrees. Now the rotation, we actually want to put it on the container, and this might be a little confusing, the container. So what I'm going to do is just give this a temporary background so you can actually see what this is, because you're probably confused, like this has a height of 190. So if we take a look at this, this is what it looks. This is the container. So it basically goes from the middle up here, and this is what we want to rotate this way. So from 0 degrees, which is at now, all the way 360 to do a full turn. So I think that hopefully that helps you visualize this a little better. So let's put our animation on here. We want to use our rotate animation, our keyframe, and the time is really important. We want this to be 7.5 seconds, just like our JavaScript, and we want this to be linear, forwards, and infinite, because we want it to keep going. We don't want it to just make one swoop and then stop. We want it to keep going. So yeah, and then we also want to add a transform origin, which is, it sets the origin for the element's transformation, and that's going to be bottom center. So if I save that and we take a look, you can see exactly how this is working with this background here, almost like a clock. So I want to remove that. Obviously I don't want that red background. That's just so you can see how this is working. So I'm going to get rid of that red background, and now it just floats around. All right, now we want this to expand, and it might mess up until you reload just because the JavaScript and the CSS have to be, synchronous. So this, we want to go in and out. And remember, we have that show and shrink class getting added. I'm sorry, grow and shrink. You can see right here. So shrink, now it's grow. So we want to take advantage of that and create our animations for that. So I'm going to copy this keyframes here. Oops. So we'll paste that in twice. This is going to be grow. And instead of rotate on the from, we want to use scale. That's how we're going to give it that effect. And it's going to start at 1, which is just the default scale, and then 2, so grow is going to scale to 1.2. Okay, so that's the largest it's going to get. And then for shrink, we want to set the scale to 1.2, because remember, when it's finished growing, it's going to be at 1.2, so that's where we start with for shrink, and then we want to shrink down back to 1. Okay, so pretty easy. Now, where we want to apply these two animations is on the container, but only when they have those certain classes. So let's say if the container has a class of grow, then we want to add that animation of grow for 3 seconds, and we also want to add forwards or linear and forwards. And then I'll just grab this, we'll copy that down, and then for shrink, we want to change both of these to shrink, both the class name and the animation. So let's save that. Let's take a look. I'm just going to reload. And now it's going to grow. It's still, when it hits here, it hits hold, and then breathe out, and then it retracts down or scales down. So when it hits this point, it's at 1.2, and then it scales down to back to 1. And that's it. So, I mean, it's pretty simple. And I think this is a nice project because it just shows you how to, work with both JavaScript and CSS and create some cool animation effect. All right, so that's it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you already took this in the Udemy course, hopefully this maybe shed some more light on it if you didn't fully understand it, because I did explain it in a different way. But that's it, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.